The morning light over Portland filtered through half-closed blinds, painting pale stripes across the Dawson apartment. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and reheated coffee. Irene Dawson stood by the sink, scrubbing a pan she'd already washed twice, her shoulders tight from another sleepless night. Her day started before sunrise, stocking shelves at a small grocery store until noon, then logging in for her second job as a remote logistics coordinator. Every dollar mattered. The mortgage payment loomed like a silent countdown at the end of each month. Behind her, a wheelchair creaked. Victor, her husband, tried to maneuver toward the table, his legs still stiff from the accident months ago. "Morning," he murmured, reaching for the orange juice. Irene smiled faintly, poured him a glass, then checked her phone for delivery schedules. Before she could take a sip of coffee, the sound of a key twisting in the front door made her freeze. Gloria Dawson didn't knock. She never did. The door swung open, and her perfume, sharp floral, overbearing, filled the kitchen. "I brought groceries," she announced, setting a single paper bag on the counter. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the pile of laundry in the corner and the stack of medical bills near the toaster. "Good heavens, Irene, you call this tidy? Poor Victor, having to live in such chaos." Irene took a slow breath, counted to 3. "Good morning, Gloria. The house is fine. I just finished my shift." "Oh, I can tell," Gloria replied, lips curling. "You look exhausted. I told Victor a woman shouldn't work herself like that. It's not healthy for a marriage." She opened the fridge, clucked her tongue. "Mold on the cheese again. You should really plan your meals better. Fresh food builds strength." Victor tried to interject, embarrassed. "Mom, it's fine. Irene cooks every night." Gloria waved him off. "Sweetheart, you're too kind. She means well, but domestic skills aren't exactly her strength. Maybe when she has a real family to guide her." The words landed like tiny cuts. Irene didn't turn around. She rinsed the sponge and said evenly, "I appreciate your concern, but I've got it handled." Gloria's smile sharpened. "Handled? On 2 jobs and take-out dinners? My son deserves better. When I was your age, I stayed home, took care of my husband. He never had to lift a finger." Irene dried her hands and finally met her mother-in-law's gaze. "You also had savings, Gloria. We don't. Someone has to keep the bills paid." For a second, the older woman blinked, then laughed softly, a sound dripping with disdain. "Of course. Always about money with you. You young wives, you marry for love until the checkbook runs dry. Then it's complaints and overtime shifts." She turned to Victor, patting his shoulder. "I warned you, didn't I? A wife only needs her husband when he still brings something to the table." The silence that followed was heavy and brittle. Irene's throat tightened, but she said nothing. She only gathered her purse, keys, and work badge from the counter. "I'll be late for my shift," she murmured, as the door closed behind her. Gloria's perfume still lingered in the air, along with that final sentence, echoing like a curse. A wife only needs her husband when he still brings something to the table. That was the moment Irene realized the cracks in her marriage weren't from exhaustion. They'd been carved slowly by the woman who just smiled in her kitchen. It had started with something as simple as a cup of gas station coffee and a tired smile. Years before the arguments, before the accident, Irene had met Victor on a cold November night at a rest stop off I-84. He was a long-haul truck driver then, easygoing, talkative, the kind of man who remembered to hold doors open. She was 25, working the register at a convenience store while saving for a logistics certification. He came in every few days on his delivery route, always ordering black coffee and joking that she made it better than any diner on the road. Their friendship turned into something steadier. Victor would call from distant states, describing sunsets over the plains, the hum of diesel engines at dawn. He made her feel noticed in a world that rarely looked twice at her. For a girl who'd grown up in foster homes, the warmth felt like a promise. When he proposed 6 months later, with a cheap silver ring and an honest smile, she said yes without hesitation. At first, marriage was simple: small apartment, shared bills, late-night takeout, and laughter. Then Gloria entered their daily rhythm. She lived an hour away in Salem and called every evening. Her voice carried equal parts worry and command. "Eat real food, Victor. Irene's too busy chasing paychecks to cook." The comments began as jokes, then sharpened. Victor brushed them off, but Irene noticed how he flinched each time his phone lit up with Mom. When they decided to buy a condo in Portland, Irene sold the tiny studio she'd bought before marriage. Her down payment covered most of the purchase. Gloria insisted on holding Victor's savings, money he claimed to have from his late father, for an upcoming medical procedure she never actually scheduled. Irene didn't protest. She wanted peace more than fairness. Then came the accident. A careless driver ran a red light, crushing the side of Victor's truck. He survived, but left the hospital with both legs in casts and a long recovery ahead. In those first weeks, Irene believed love could fill the cracks. She handled insurance calls, medical forms, physical therapy appointments. Gloria visited daily, bringing homemade soups and criticism in equal measure. If you hadn't pushed him to work so hard, this wouldn't have happened. Money drained fast. Insurance covered part of the rehab, but not the mortgage or utilities. Irene took an extra shift at the store and a second job entering freight data at night. Meanwhile, Gloria hovered, rearranging the kitchen, insisting on choosing Victor's clothes, telling him when to take painkillers. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like territory divided between mother and wife. Sometimes, when Irene came home past midnight, she found them laughing at old family videos. Her husband relaxed in a way he never was around her anymore. The sight left her hollow. She loved him, but his world had tilted back toward the woman who never let go. By the time the casts came off, Irene realized the marriage had shifted into something she could no longer recognize, one where Gloria's voice carried more weight than hers, and every act of care felt like proof she was failing. It wasn't hatred that grew inside her then. It was fatigue, heavy and silent, the kind that seeps into the bones and waits for a breaking point. The rain that morning came down in thin, slanted lines, tapping softly against the kitchen window. Irene was already halfway through her first cup of coffee, the one small ritual she allowed herself before the chaos of another day. Victor was dozing on the couch, his legs still in braces, a blanket pulled loosely around his shoulders. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, until the sound of the door unlocking broke apart. Gloria didn't even bother to say hello. She stepped inside, hung her umbrella by the door, and inhaled deeply, as if measuring the air for mistakes. "It smells." "Lived in," she commented, setting down a plastic grocery bag. "I brought chicken soup. Yours looked like something out of a can the last time I checked." Irene straightened. "I made that soup from scratch, Gloria. Yesterday." The older woman lifted the pot lid, sniffed, and gave a pitying smile. "Maybe that's the problem. You don't know when food goes bad." She turned toward her son. "Sweetheart, tell her you shouldn't be eating leftovers. You need fresh meals to heal." Victor rubbed his temples. "Mom, please, don't interrupt me," Gloria snapped, then resumed her inspection. She ran a finger along the counter, checking for dust. "And look at this. Grease on the stove. How can a woman keep a home like this? You work all day, but you can't even manage a simple household." Irene's hands tightened around her coffee mug. For months, she had swallowed every insult, every accusation disguised as advice, but something in her finally cracked. "Gloria," she said evenly, "if you're so worried about Victor's care, maybe you should handle it yourself. I'm sure you'd do it better." The silence that followed felt electric. Victor looked between them, startled. Gloria's painted lips curved slowly into a smirk. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? A little vacation while someone else cleans up after your husband." "I wouldn't call it a vacation," Irene replied. "There's a meeting in Seattle next week. My manager wants to discuss remote work options. I can't keep up 2 jobs forever." Gloria placed a hand dramatically over her chest. "You'd leave him alone in his condition?" "Irene, honestly, that's cold, even for you." "I wouldn't leave him alone," Irene said quietly. "You just volunteered." Victor tried to diffuse the tension with a nervous chuckle. "Let's not turn this into a fight." But Gloria's tone softened suddenly, falsely sweet. "No fight at all, darling. If your wife needs to chase her little career dreams, I'll stay here. I'll make sure you're cared for properly. Perhaps when she returns, she'll see how much better things run with a woman who truly loves you." Irene felt the words slice deeper than intended, yet she forced a calm smile. "Perfect," she said. "Then it's settled." Gloria nodded, clearly pleased with her victory. "Good. You'll see, Victor, once I'm here, you'll finally have peace." Irene turned away before they could see the tears rising behind her eyes. Peace, she thought bitterly, had never felt so much like surrender. But for the first time in months, a quiet, dangerous thought flickered inside her. Maybe letting Gloria take control was exactly what needed to happen. Because this time, Irene would be watching from a distance, and she wouldn't come back the same. The night before Irene's planned trip, the apartment pulsed with tension. The television played softly in the background, but neither she nor Victor was watching. She had just finished packing a small suitcase, 1 week's worth of clothes, her laptop, and a folder with company reports she hoped to discuss in Seattle. When she zipped it shut, Victor's voice cut through the quiet. "So, you're really doing this without even asking me?" Irene froze. "I told you it's just a short business trip. I need to meet with my supervisor about remote work. It could make things easier for both of us." "For both of us?" He let out a bitter laugh. "That's funny, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just running away." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Running away? Victor, I've been holding this family together since your accident. I'm trying to find a way to keep us afloat. You know, the bills are piling up. And whose fault is that?" he snapped, shifting awkwardly in his wheelchair. "You're the one who keeps saying we can't live on one paycheck that I can't provide. Maybe if you didn't have to prove you're some big career woman, things would be different." She blinked, stunned. "That's not fair." "Life's not fair," he shot back, echoing a tone she'd heard before from Gloria. "Mom said it from the start. A woman only stays while a man has something to give. Once he's broken, she starts packing her bags." The words hit her harder than he realized. She stared at him, unable to speak. "You really believe that?" she finally whispered. He looked away, jaw tightening. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe she's right. You barely talk to me. You're never home. You work yourself to death, and for what? To show everyone you can live without me." "I'm doing this for us." "Victor," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "You think I want to work double shifts? You think I like coming home to find your mother criticizing everything I do? I'm trying to keep this roof over our heads." He didn't answer. The silence between them stretched until it felt suffocating. Finally, he muttered, "If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't expect me to be waiting." Something inside her went cold. The man she'd married, the one who once made her laugh with road stories and silly songs, was gone. In his place sat someone small and angry. Someone who needed a villain more than a partner. She closed her suitcase quietly and said, "Then don't wait." He turned toward her, startled, but she didn't meet his eyes. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the hallway, the air outside heavy with rain. Her hands shook as she texted Natalie, "Can I stay a few days before my trip?" The reply came instantly, of course. Doors open. That night, as Irene drove through the dim Portland streets toward her friend's apartment, she didn't cry. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving only exhaustion and the faint, aching sense that somewhere along the way, love had turned into something neither of them could recognize anymore. Natalie's apartment sat above a small bakery in downtown Beaverton, and the warm scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the thin walls as Irene dropped her overnight bag by the couch. The space was small but alive. Children's drawings on the fridge, laundry folded neatly in baskets, a cactus thriving on the windowsill. It was the kind of home built by endurance, not luck. Natalie handed her a mug of tea, the steam curling between them. "You look worse than when we were pulling all-nighters in the group home," she said, half joking, half concerned. Irene smiled faintly. "That bad, huh?" "Worse," Natalie said. "You're running on fumes." She leaned against the counter, arms folded. "So what happened this time?" "Let me guess, Gloria again." Irene sighed. "She's watching Victor while I go to Seattle. It's just a week. I need to meet with my supervisor about working remotely." Natalie's brow furrowed. "You're leaving her in charge of your husband? The woman who's been trying to tear you down for 2 years." "She's his mother," Irene said softly. "Maybe if she takes care of him for a bit, she'll finally see how hard it is." Natalie set her cup down a little too sharply. "Or maybe she'll see how easy it is to push you out completely." The words hung in the air like static. Irene didn't answer. Natalie walked over and crouched in front of her, voice gentler now. "Irene, you've been doing this your whole life, believing people will change if you just love them enough. Remember the foster home? You were always the one fixing everyone's mess, even when it broke you." "That was different," Irene murmured. "No, it wasn't." Natalie's tone was steady but kind. "You can't build your future around a man who lets his mother decide who you are. That's not love, it's dependency. Don't let it swallow you." Irene rubbed her temples, the tea cooling in her hands. "You make it sound so simple. But he's not a bad person, Nat. He's just lost. Once he's back on his feet, things will be different." Her friend shook her head. "You're hoping for a version of him that might never come back." Irene forced a smile, the kind people wear when they're too tired to argue. "Let's just say I need this trip to clear my head, to breathe a little." Natalie sighed, but didn't press further. "You know the door's always open." The next morning, Irene hugged her goodbye, promising to call once she arrived in Seattle. But as she drove toward Union Station, suitcase beside her, she felt the first uneasy weight of a thought she couldn't quite name, like a shadow on the horizon. Something told her this trip wouldn't end the way she imagined. Union Station buzzed with the sound of rolling suitcases and echoing announcements. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain, typical Portland in early spring. Irene checked the departure board for her train to Seattle, then found an empty bench near the far end of the concourse. She glanced at her phone. No messages from Victor, none from Gloria either. For the first time in weeks, she exhaled without feeling watched. She opened her laptop to skim through notes for her meeting, trying to focus. But her attention drifted to the hum of voices nearby, commuters talking, kids laughing, the static of daily life. Then, among the noise, a familiar voice cut through like a blade. "I told you, don't worry. I'll take care of everything." Her spine stiffened. That voice, Gloria's. Irene's head turned sharply. Just a few feet away, behind a pillar near the cafe, Gloria Dawson stood with her phone pressed to her ear, dressed in her usual beige trench coat and pearl earrings. She looked far too composed for someone who should have been home, caring for her injured son. "No. Listen to me," Gloria said, lowering her voice. "He's fragile. Poor thing, doesn't even know how bad it is. His wife's barely hanging on, some kind of terminal thing. The doctors said Yes, yes, I'll get the money from Oliver. He still owes me a favor, and it's not like he needs to know the truth. Irene's stomach twisted. Oliver? She leaned back, slightly heart-pounding. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since the group home, when Oliver Hayes was the boy who always defended her from bullies. Her first friend, her first love, and now Gloria was using his name in a scam? Gloria's voice grew more animated. Don't you see? Once I have the cash, we can finally settle everything. Pay off the condo, maybe even move Victor somewhere better. The woman's as good as gone anyway. It's what's best for everyone. The words hit Irene like cold water. Gone. That was how Gloria spoke about her, like she was already dead. She wanted to confront her right there, to demand an explanation, but instinct told her to stay quiet. Gloria ended the call and adjusted her coat, muttering something about catching the 10:30 train. Irene's hands trembled as she watched the older woman walk toward the platform. She's leaving town and meeting Oliver. In that instant, Irene's plans changed. The meeting in Seattle no longer mattered. She grabbed her suitcase and followed, keeping several yards behind. Every nerve in her body buzzed with disbelief and fury, but beneath it all was a sharper, colder clarity. This was the moment everything had led to. Gloria thought she'd fooled everyone, but not this time. As the whistle of the departing train echoed through the station, Irene stepped aboard the same car, her expression calm, her pulse a storm. She didn't know what she would find at the end of this journey, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't the one being fooled anymore. The train rattled out of Portland just as the rain began to fade into a pale drizzle. Irene sat 2 rows behind Gloria, her body still tense from the rush of boarding unnoticed. She had managed to find a seat near the window, close enough to hear, but far enough not to be seen. Every squeal of the wheels against the tracks felt like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Gloria sat facing another passenger, a man in his 50s dressed in a tailored gray coat. Her voice carried easily over the rhythmic hum of the train. Yes, I'm going to meet him in West Lynne, she was saying cheerfully. Oliver Hayes, such a generous young man. I practically raised him. My son's poor wife is in terrible condition. Lung cancer, stage 4. It's heartbreaking. The man gasped softly. I'm so sorry to hear that. Gloria nodded, sighing with theatrical grief. Yes, she's bedridden. My son refuses to leave her side. Such a devoted husband, bless him. But the hospital bills, you can imagine. We're desperate for help, and Oliver always had a soft spot for her. Such a shame she's wasting away after all that girl put him through. Irene's hands clenched around the edge of her seat. Wasting away. The words tasted like poison. Gloria continued, lowering her voice just enough to make people lean in. Of course. She's not exactly an angel. Poor Victor doesn't know half of it. How she spent his money. How she flirted with that doctor during rehab. But I suppose guilt comes for everyone eventually. The man nodded, murmuring something polite, but Irene barely heard. Her heart was pounding, her vision blurring. She wanted to stand up, to shout the truth for the whole car to hear. That she wasn't dying, wasn't cheating. Wasn't anything Gloria painted her to be. But she stayed still, nails digging into her palms. Outside the window, the Willamette River glimmered under the gray sky as the train curved south. The landscape blurred, pine forests, bridges, small towns flashing by. Inside, Gloria's voice kept weaving its web of lies, each word another thread tightening around Irene's throat. When the train slowed near Oregon City, Irene forced herself to breathe. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a plan. Gloria was manipulating Oliver, the one person from Irene's past who might actually care enough to help. If she exposed the lie too soon, everything could collapse before she had proof. She reached for her phone, pretending to scroll while discreetly recording Gloria's words. The red light blinked faintly, a silent witness. As the train rolled toward West Lynne, Irene's reflection stared back at her in the window, calm on the surface, but burning underneath. Her tears never fell. Instead, she whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "You can't erase me, Gloria. Not this time." And with that, she waited for the moment the train would stop, ready to follow wherever the lies led next. The train pulled into West Lynne just past noon, the sky a quiet silver. Irene waited until Gloria stepped onto the platform before following at a careful distance. The older woman walked briskly through the small town, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, one hand clutching her designer handbag. Irene trailed her across the narrow streets lined with boutique shops and cafes until they reached the gates of a large property, a modern two-story home framed by cedar trees and glass. The name on the mailbox, Red Haze. Gloria pressed the doorbell, smoothing her coat as if preparing for a performance. A moment later, a man appeared. Oliver Hayes. He was older than Irene remembered. Sharper features, broader shoulders. But his eyes were unmistakable, the same warm gray that had once made her feel safe. He greeted Gloria with a polite smile, confusion flickering across his face. "Mrs. Dawson? It's been a long time." "I wish this visit were under happier circumstances," Gloria began, her voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "Irene, my son's wife. You remember her, she's dying. It's been awful. Victor is beside himself. We just don't have the means for her care." Oliver's expression softened instantly. "Irene? I hadn't heard. That's terrible." He stepped aside. "Please come in." From her hiding spot near the gate, Irene felt her stomach twist. She watched as the two disappeared into the house, her heart pounding as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, Gloria emerged, smiling faintly, tucking an envelope into her purse before walking back toward town. When she was gone, Irene approached the house, nerves trembling beneath her resolve. She rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened and Oliver froze. "Irene," he whispered, eyes wide. She nodded, her voice low. "Alive and not dying. Surprised." He stepped back, speechless, then gestured for her to come in. She followed him into a living room flooded with natural light, elegant but unpretentious, much like the boy she once knew. "What's going on?" he asked finally. "Your mother-in-law said that I'm terminally ill? That Victor's bankrupt, trying to keep me alive." Irene gave a short, bitter laugh. "She's been using you, Oliver. She just took your money." He looked down, anger flashing in his eyes. "I gave it willingly. I thought I was helping you." Irene hesitated, then said softly, "You always did." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Oliver exhaled, his shoulders lowering. "You have no idea how many times I looked for you after the home closed. My adoptive parents moved me overseas for school. I thought I'd lost everyone from that part of my life." She blinked, emotion catching in her throat. "And now you find me here, married to a man whose mother just conned you." Oliver's jaw tightened. "She won't get away with it. I'll make sure of that. Whatever she told people about you, I'll help you clear your name." Irene nodded slowly, the weight of months of humiliation easing just a little. "I don't need revenge," she said, her voice steady. "Just the truth." Oliver looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then we'll start there." Outside, the rain had stopped, and for the first time in a long while, Irene felt the air in her lungs again, sharp, clean, and alive with possibility. Oliver insisted she stay for lunch, though Irene protested at first. "You've had a shock," he said gently. "At least eat something before deciding what to do next." The dining room was filled with soft light, filtered through tall glass panels overlooking the garden. The smell of roasted herbs drifted from the kitchen, and soon a woman appeared carrying a tray, elegant, silver-haired, and composed in that quiet, commanding way that needed no introduction. "This is my mother," Oliver said. "Eleanor Hayes." Eleanor set the tray down, her movements deliberate, graceful. "So, you're Irene," she said, studying her with a calm that saw more than words could tell. "Oliver told me everything, or at least, what little he understands." Irene felt her nerves tighten. "Then I owe you an apology, Mrs. Hayes. I didn't mean to intrude." "Nonsense," Eleanor interrupted softly, pulling out a chair. "You look like someone who's been told to apologize her whole life. Sit." The authority in her tone left no room for argument. Irene obeyed. They ate quietly for a few minutes. Eleanor poured tea and finally said, "I met women like Gloria before. Sweet smiles, tragic stories, and a dozen victims in their wake. Manipulation is an art they perfect over time." Irene looked down at her plate. "She's good at it," she admitted. "Even Victor believes her." "Of course he does," Eleanor replied, her tone not unkind. "Children raised under control rarely recognize it. They mistake fear for loyalty." She set her cup down. "And you, why do you still feel responsible for her?" Irene hesitated, searching for words. "Because I married her son. Because I thought if I just worked harder, loved more, I could fix what was broken." Eleanor smiled sadly. "That's the curse of good people, my dear. You think endurance is love." The room fell silent again. Outside, the wind rustled through the cedars. Oliver watched them both quietly, the lines around his eyes softening. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand warm against Irene's cold fingers. "You've been surviving for too long. Stay here a few days. Rest. Think. You don't make good choices when you're exhausted." Irene blinked, emotion tightening her throat. "I can't impose." "You'd be doing me a favor," Eleanor interrupted. "I've been meaning to fill this house with someone who doesn't pretend." For the first time in years, Irene felt something other than duty. She felt seen. The tension in her chest loosened. She nodded slowly. "All right. A few days." Eleanor smiled, satisfied. "Good. Then we'll talk about what comes next, after you remember who you are." And as the light faded across the Hayes estate, Irene realized she hadn't felt this kind of peace since long before she became a Dawson. The sky over Portland was the color of tin when Irene returned home. She'd spent 3 days at the Hayes estate, just long enough to regain her balance and decide to confront the mess head-on. As she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, something immediately felt wrong. Her parking spot was empty. Victor's old truck was gone. And when she reached the door, her key no longer fit. She tried again, then again, the metal scraping uselessly. From inside came footsteps, a pause, and then the familiar, syrupy voice she'd come to dread. "Oh, Irene, you're back." Gloria stood in the doorway, dressed as though she were hosting a dinner party, not breaking the law. Behind her, the apartment looked rearranged. Victor's recliner angled differently, her framed photo from their wedding conspicuously gone. "What's going on?" Irene asked, her voice calm but tight. Gloria tilted her head. "Victor thought it best to change the locks. You see, dear, things have progressed while you were gone." Before Irene could respond, Victor appeared behind his mother. He looked thinner, paler, his braces gone, though his steps were uncertain. His eyes, however, were firm in a way that chilled her. "Victor," she said, "why did you change the locks?" He didn't meet her gaze. "Irene, I think it's best if we separate. Mom and I talked to a lawyer. The divorce papers are ready. You'll get your share once the assets are divided." "Divorce?" Irene repeated softly. "You made that decision without even speaking to me." Gloria stepped in, smug. "He's realized the truth, finally. You've been draining him for years, his health, his peace, his finances. It's time he took back control." Irene's pulse pounded, but she didn't raise her voice. Gloria, this is my home too. My name is on the mortgage. You can't legally lock me out. Victor's jaw tightened. I don't love you anymore. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. No anger, no shouting, just that single sentence echoing like a final verdict. Then Irene reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Fine, she said evenly. Let's do this the right way. Gloria's smirk faltered as Irene called the non-emergency police line. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived, taking statements on the porch. Irene calmly presented her documentation. The mortgage contract bearing both her and Victor's names. The younger officer glanced at Victor. Ma'am's correct. You can't deny access to a legal co-owner without a court order. If the locks were changed, she's within her rights to re-enter. Gloria started to protest, but the officer cut her off. If this continues, we'll treat it as unlawful eviction. Irene stepped past her mother-in-law into the apartment, her shoes clicking on the hardwood. The air smelled of her own candles, still half-burned, the remnants of a life she'd built from exhaustion and hope. She turned to the officers, nodded in gratitude, then looked at Victor for the last time. You took my love for weakness, she said quietly. That was your first mistake. Then she closed the door behind them, sealing Gloria's outrage and Victor's silence on the other side. Oliver didn't waste time. The morning after the lockout incident, he drove to Portland, picked Irene up, and took her straight to the office of his attorney, a clean, glass-front firm in downtown, the kind that made people sit up straighter. The attorney, Mark Ellison, listened without interrupting as Irene laid out everything. The months of harassment, the financial pressure, the sudden change of locks, and, most importantly, the lie Gloria had spun at Union Station. When Irene showed him the recording from the train and Oliver confirmed there was exterior camera footage from his West Lynn property, Ellison's expression hardened. This isn't just family drama, he said. This is fraud, coercion, and attempted unlawful eviction. And she used a false medical emergency to obtain money. That plays very badly in front of an Oregon judge. Within a week, Ellison filed a civil complaint on Irene's behalf, naming both Gloria and, reluctantly, Victor, since he had participated in the lock change and attempted dispossession. Gloria, certain she was still in control, showed up to the first hearing in a bright blazer and pearls, fully prepared to play the role of the wronged mother. Her confidence lasted exactly 3 minutes. That was how long it took Ellison to play the security footage from the Hayes property. Gloria accepting an envelope of cash from Oliver, claiming it was for Irene's treatment, then walking away smiling. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and little patience, leaned forward. Mrs. Dawson, are you telling this court you believed your daughter-in-law was dying? Gloria floundered. Well, that is. I may have exaggerated. You told a third party she was terminal, Ellison said calmly. You told him her husband was financially ruined. Neither was true. You took his money under false pretenses, and then within days, you participated in an attempted illegal exclusion of that same woman from a home she co-owns. Victor kept his head down the entire time. He didn't look once at Irene. In the final ruling, the court was clear. Irene remained a lawful co-owner of the Portland condo. The attempt to remove her without a court order was illegal. Gloria was ordered to return the full amount she had obtained from Oliver, plus court costs, because Victor had allowed his mother to act in his name, and because Irene had been forced to find temporary lodging during the lockout. The judge also granted limited damages to Irene for emotional distress and disruption of residence. The judgment landed hard. Gloria didn't have enough liquid money to pay everything back. Within months, she was forced to sell her own small house in Salem to satisfy the debt. Victor, still not fully back to work and now, without Irene's income to steady him, couldn't keep up with his own bills. Creditors circled. What had begun as an attempt to push Irene out ended with the two of them, mother and son, staring at the wreckage of their finances. Irene, meanwhile, moved forward. She stayed for a while in West Lynne, working remotely just as she'd originally planned to request. A few months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl at a Portland hospital. When Oliver visited the room, carrying pale pink flowers, she placed the baby in his arms and said, "Her name is Anna." He looked at her in surprise. After the life I wanted to have," she said softly. "A clean one, a chosen one." Outside that hospital, the world went on, unaware that quite justice had been done. Gloria and Victor now rented a small, unimpressive apartment far from the city center, the kind of place where no one cared about their old excuses. The condo stayed with Irene, legally and permanently. She hadn't screamed, hadn't destroyed, hadn't played dirty. She had simply told the truth and let the system do the rest. And in that, there was a different kind of revenge, one written in court orders and notarized pages, impossible to undo. A full year passed before the rhythm of Irene's life began to feel her own again. The condo in Portland was sold. The proceeds helped her clear debts and start anew in West Lynne, where the cedar trees framed a quieter sky. She worked remotely now, running logistics for a regional firm from a small home office that overlooked the garden. Each morning, sunlight spilled across her desk while little Anna babbled in a bassinet nearby, her tiny hands grasping at the air. It wasn't the life Irene had once imagined, but it was hers, built from truth instead of compromise. She no longer measured her days in what she could endure, but in what she could create. Oliver visited often at first, bringing groceries, helping with repairs, staying longer each time. It began with shared dinners, casual, familiar, threaded with laughter that felt too easy for people who'd both been through so much. One evening, as they sat outside with mugs of tea and the soft hum of crickets, he said, quietly, "You never had to do any of it alone. You know." "I did," she replied, smiling faintly, "but I'm glad I don't have to anymore." By the next spring, their companionship had settled into something steadier, love that didn't demand or bruise, love that listened. When Oliver proposed, he did it simply, a gold band in the palm of his hand, sunlight glinting off the metal. Eleanor stood behind him, her expression warm and approving. The wedding was held in the garden, just the three of them and a local officiant. Eleanor served as witness, her hands trembling slightly as she signed her name beneath theirs. "Every woman deserves to begin again," she whispered as she kissed Irene's cheek. After the ceremony, Oliver lifted Anna into his arms while Irene stood beside them, the smell of roses thick in the air. For the first time, her future didn't feel like something she had to fight for. It was simply waiting for her, open and whole. Far away, the Dawson story unraveled. Gloria, stripped of her savings and reputation, lived in a decaying rental on the outskirts of Salem. She had tried to rebuild by controlling what little she had left. But even that slipped away when Victor, resentful and desperate, quietly emptied her account. By the time she realized it was too late, he'd vanished, leaving only debts behind. The woman who once prided herself on control now faced the one truth she could never manipulate: loss. Irene heard about it months later through a mutual acquaintance. She listened in silence, then nodded once, expression unreadable. That night, after putting Anna to bed, she stood by the window, watching the moonlight touch the crib. Her reflection in the glass looked older, calmer, unrecognizable to the woman who used to flinch at every knock on the door. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I didn't destroy them. I just stopped saving them." And in that quiet, steady truth, there was no vengeance left, only peace.